Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of the Hyperion Cleantech Group and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. Welcome again to our second bite-size Leaders in Cleantech podcast. By accident, not design, I have with me another individual I've known for some time from the solar industry, doing some very interesting things around the Innovation Zero Summit this month, which we'll catch up on. But Tim, great to have you with us.
Yeah, lovely to be here, David. Thanks very much for giving me the time today.
Do you know what? I was trying to think over the weekend of when we first met, and I'm fairly sure when you're at Solar Media, I think the office was near the Renewable Energy Association offices from memory, and I think that's probably when we first bumped into each other.
Yeah, so we, I was doing stuff at Solar Media. I remember you at the time. You were a respected figure because you'd come out of the industry and into sort of more the people side, hadn't you? I think you'd come from the solar installer business, and you were getting involved in the REA and other industry bodies at the time. So you were a good contact for us at the time. Yeah,
no, it was interesting. And those solar days, again, won't bore the audience, but I talk about it a lot just because I enjoyed it so much and learned so much. And clearly we really did move the dial forward in solar in the UK. And obviously what you were doing was very much behind that with your role and as MD of Solar Media. Perhaps you could just, literally for a quick, give us a flavour of your experiences within the solar and the broader sort of sustainability arena, which has brought you now to bringing this great event to the table.
Yeah, sure. So, solar was the first time, working for Solar Media was the first time I've been involved in, I guess, the whole low carbon space in the widest sense. Yeah. So I was, as you say, leading a business which was doing communications, connecting and informing people around the space internationally and locally. And I think that, for me personally, that led me into the space of wanting to understand more about the wider energy transformation, and then the low carbon transformation. But I think the sector at the time was fascinating. It was quite pioneering in many ways. It's quite a fragmented sector, wasn't it? But quite pioneering in terms of how it was building a sector pretty much from scratch from a lot of small businesses, and actually set the tone for what a lot of the other sectors are now following on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you look at the sector now, obviously both technologies moved along, but much of what those pioneering organisations that were doing at the time has really laid the foundations for much of what's going on now. So talk us a little about the Innovation Zero event, which we're really excited about. Hyperion will obviously be a partner in that, and which is coming up pretty soon. But there's some really fascinating talks and speakers that you wouldn't necessarily think of as someone who's in the sector. What's the audience, and tell us perhaps a little bit more about the context of how it came about and what's going to be going on at the event on the 24th, 25th.
Yeah, I found it fascinating, honestly, being involved in it. And for me, it came up from an old industry friend and colleague had initiated this project with a friend and colleague of his, and it caught my attention because it was exactly in this space that we're describing.
Yeah.
And the intention was to build, I guess the big picture, the big idea is to build a new global network of innovators, funders, policymakers and customers, or large emitting companies, with a series of events, moments, I guess, in the year, which we'll build out internationally. And as you say, I think the point of getting some unusual suspects in there, I think there's a lot of events that happen where there's a lot of traditional players, people who've been around the sector and around the role for a long time are involved, but increasingly, as you know better than most, we need to engage much wider groups of the economy and society now. So we wanted to sort of get into UK government particularly, and we've engaged UK government in a number of different places and different levels. And in doing that work, I think we found that there's a lot more happening within government and from government that maybe a lot of people are aware of, and I think that's important to kind of profile and show people. But there's also a lot happening in all the different sectors, and we felt there were events for each sector. The built environment has its events, the energy sector has its events, but there wasn't necessarily something that was connecting across the sectors and allowing the opportunity for innovation that could be applied to more than one to come into one place and maybe find new funders, find new buyers.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting, and as you say, there's a lot of events, and they're great, by the way, and I love going to them, but they can be a little bit in your bubble. And as you said, I think so much of what we need to do is actually engage people who aren't used to talking to each other, because we all have to be part of the solution. So whether that's government, whether that's funders, whether it's VCs, whether that's pension funds, whether that's obviously policymakers, all this kind of stuff, we need everybody talking to understand what's going on, and also just engaging in a broader audience. Say that this stuff is not it's a long way past niche stuff. There's real serious consequences economically, let alone environmentally, from us doing these things right. And that's what really struck me about looking at the speakers and the format of the event. Maybe just share one or two of the keynote speakers and some of the headlines of what people can expect if they attend the event over the couple of days.
Yeah, and if I just pick up a couple of your points there, again, of the unusual suspects bit and the impact, I guess, economically. A good example is we've got a UK government said they're setting up a pavilion there, and they're showing a lot of the innovations which they've supported. They've also got their own theatre running where they're sort of educating people on how they can support further.
Right.
We've also got a pavilion being set up by the Teesside cluster, the Humber cluster. So again, from an industrial UK point of view, we've got some quite good coverage.
Yeah.
It was a really interesting session with the heads of each of the clusters, talking about, again, the whole industrial development strategy nationally. There's been some really interesting stuff on the finance side. You touched on sort of some of the types of funding, but I found we've got a finance theatre running where we've got one session on kind of early stage funding, one on more scale up, one on infrastructure funding, one on pension funds.
Right.
And as I was doing the research around this, I was just finding there was a lot of large funders, big funds who are looking for a way into this clean tech space and the clean infrastructure space, and don't necessarily have the black book that they've had previously, because it's a new space for them. So there's a real appetite for funders to connect with counterparties, co-investors, and new portfolio opportunities.
Yeah. I think that is absolutely the fundamental path to success is engaging with all of these entities who have either been reluctant to, or often just because they don't know how to or where to engage and start to get involved, even if they wanted to. And I think that's really the thing that excited me most about the conference or a couple of days. And obviously we'll have a number of the Hyperion people there. But again, if you maybe share if people are thinking about attending, what other things that aside from those theatres you've talked about people can engage in, and what sorts of people they're likely to meet if they're able to get along to attend the events?
Yeah, so there's a keynote stage. There's a main stage which will be very nicely set up. There's some policy announcements up on the main stage. We've got Secretary of State for Trade UK. We've got a minister from Energy Security and Net Zero. We just signed up at the end of last week. We've got a representative of the Climate Envoy, Senator Kerry's office, coming to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and impacts and implications for international businesses. So some quite interesting policy level conversations. We've got some C-level panels happening on that same stage where we're tackling, I guess, the short-term future of sectors like aviation, the built environment, cities. Mayor Houchin is coming down from the Tees Valley again. Someone like John Holland-Kay from London Heathrow. So it's quite interesting, again, just touching on the different sectors. Then people would go out onto the show floor where we've got quite an array of innovators from all sectors, innovations which could apply to the built environment, the food and agri sector, energy environment. And I touched on those theatres. We're diving down in different sort of content areas into implications for the energy sector, the mobility sector. And then we've also got sessions which are tackling, I guess, themes which might run across sector. So the heat, heat as a subject, or cement as a subject. But large emitting areas which would have implications for multiple stakeholders. Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot in there. So I think one of the challenges is just navigating the things that can be done on site over a couple of days. Yeah,
I'm sure it's keeping you awake at night. As anyone who organises events always has a challenging run up, but it's nice when you start getting close and start to see all of the hard work and research you've been doing starting to take shape and starting to get the big names lined up and. I'm starting to see that actually it's on the horizon, I guess. But you've done many of these things over many years, so an old hand, so to speak. But it still must give you a lot of a buzz when you start to see it all coming together.
Yeah, it's nice. Just looking, we sort of update on the attendee list each day as people book on. We see them coming on. It's just fascinating to see the breadth of where people are coming from. I mean, all different levels, all different sector types, all different organisational types.
Yeah,
like we said, different types of funders, and some really fascinating innovation I just think it's good to profile. It's good to give people a platform to actually show what's out there. Because one of the purposes of events like this is a bit of inspiration, isn't it? It's to help people's own networks, but also to give a bit of inspiration as to some of the great stuff that's going on in the market.
Yeah, and also knock-on inspirations that we touched on. As you say, there's a lot of things around energy, and clearly that's one of the fundamental issues or areas where we need to address to get to a net zero economy. But there's so much more, I should say, about food, around obviously finance, funding, business models, all these things. It's good to be able to go to places where you get an insight into those things. But this is the first event. What's the plan thereafter in terms of future either events and or follow on from this Innovation Zero end?
Yeah. So, like I say, I mean, the big idea, the big picture is the idea of a global network. So we want we're planning to launch in different territories. For next year, 2 primary territories that are on our radar are the Middle East. Definitely doing one in the Middle East. Again, there's a lot of interest and different. I find it interesting in the Middle East, just different angles on the same big picture question. Everyone's got to look at the low carbon transformation. Obviously they're a producer region. They've got different interests and different priorities, but they still have this very high on the agenda. Also the US market, and working out exactly where to go in as to whether we focus more on the technology side in one part of the country, or we focus on the big producer side and how they can work on emissions.
Right.
So yeah, one level it's international versions, but then also as we run through this show and hopefully we deliver a good version in May, just working out how we can follow up and keep the community connected through various forms of just content and communications throughout the year. But that will be to be defined based on I guess the feedback we get and how we interact with people from May onwards.
Yeah, no, I generally think, there are a lot of events, but this does look to have a different sort of spin on things and be much more encompassing and looks like a really exciting event. We'll obviously share links and various things on the podcast page, but where can people go if they want to either find out more or register and get involved?
Yeah, it's super simple, just innovationzero.com. And I think on the homepage is a free tickets button. That's an important point as well, actually. I mean, our model, our commercial model on this is to raise funds. We've privately funded it,
right?
And our aim is to make some of that money back this year and more of it later through sponsorships and exhibition revenue, in order that we could be as inclusive as possible and make it free to attend. So
right.
It's entirely free, access all areas to sample all that content, come to the show floor. So yeah, we'd love to see as many people who want to engage as possible and for those to share. But it's very simple button, simple form to fill out, and then we hope to see people in May.
Great. No, we'll look forward to certainly some of the Hyperion team will be there. Unfortunately, I'll be out of the country at the time. But again, that point is important because we do go to so many conferences where the ticket prices are pretty steep, and they tend often to be for very specific niches, and that's good because they obviously serve a purpose. But for people who are broadly or looking to get into the sector or looking to know what's going on and get a very broad brush start that they can then at the various different theatres dive in a little bit deeper if they so choose, but to be able to do that without stumping up $2 or $3 grand in advance is I think useful for most people. Yeah,
and that's, like I say, that's the intent. It's to be inclusive. It's to get people into the room. We're not going to dissuade anyone from deciding to put money into the event in whatever way they want to, but no, we just love to see a big engaged audience who are keen to connect and build their own networks at the event.
Super. Well, listen, Tim, it's good to catch up. Hopefully we'll grab a beer or a coffee soon. It's great to know that, nice. After all these years, so many people that you met that back then are still so passionate about achieving the agenda moving forward in whatever way you do, about whether it's communications or technology or whatever. And it's great to catch up. And I'm glad that we had a chance to speak. So if you are interested, obviously we'll post the links on the page. It'll be a great event in London to get to if you can. Lots of networking to be done. Lots of obviously things to get some proper insight into what's going on, not just in the UK, but in the sector as a whole, but particularly looking at some of the things that it sounds like from UK policy point of view. Enjoy the event. Thanks, Tim, for all of your continued efforts in the sector, and we look forward to seeing what happens in May and obviously beyond with the Innovation Zero concept.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Thanks for giving us time, David, and thank you for your support for the event and for all your own good work in the space.
Great. Thanks very much, Tim.